The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the comfortable silence of deep space that I had grown used to over 6 years at Jupiter L4 relay station. This was a different kind of silence. The kind that sits in your chest and presses against your ribs like a held breath. Every channel I monitored went flat at the same moment. Every beacon I tracked simply stopped transmitting. The outer picket, 14 stations spread across the edge of our solar system, each one crewed by men and women I had trained with, shared meals with, complained about regulations with, went dark in the span of 11 seconds. I sat in my chair and stared at the empty sensor readouts for a long time before I understood what I was looking at. Then the Keth'ari arrived. They did not arrive the way you imagine an alien fleet arrives. There was no dramatic burst of light, no thunderclap in the vacuum. They simply appeared on my scope, one contact after another, dropping out of faster-than-light travel in a pattern so mathematically precise that for 3 full seconds, my console flagged it as a sensor error. No fleet in the history of space travel had ever held formation that tightly through an FTL transition. The positioning was perfect to within 50 meters across a sphere 3 billion kilometers in diameter. 3,417 individual vessels. I counted them twice. I remember that I laughed. Standing alone in a relay station the size of a large apartment, with every friendly contact on my screen replaced by hostile ones, I laughed out loud. It was not a brave laugh or a defiant one. It was the laugh of a person who has just seen something so extraordinary that the mind temporarily cannot process it as a threat. My brain simply looked at 3,417 warships, arranged in a geometrically flawless sphere around our entire solar system, and decided, for about 4 seconds, that it was genuinely impressive. Then my brain caught up with my situation, and the laughing stopped. The transmission came through on a frequency I had never heard used before, a frequency that somehow cut through the jamming on every other band. The translation software built into the relay station had never encountered Keth'ari language before, yet it processed the message in under 2 seconds. That told me something. It told me they had been watching us long enough to learn exactly how our systems worked. The message was short. It was polite, in the way that a closed door is polite, technically without hostility, but absolutely clear about the fact that you are not going through it. Species of the Sol system, it said, you are surrounded. Resistance is unnecessary and irrational. You will cease all military operations and submit your civilization for integration within 72 Keth'ari cycles. Compliance will be met with efficiency. Non-compliance is not a viable outcome. We await your acknowledgement. I read it 3 times. Then I opened a channel to Earth and uplinked everything I had. Every sensor reading, every contact position, every detail of the transmission. I labeled the package simply, "We have a problem." The Sol Defense Council convened within the hour. I was patched into the session from my relay post, a small square on a screen among many, watching the people who held the fate of 8 billion humans in their hands argue in real time. Politicians said we should negotiate. Admirals said we should fight back immediately. A general with 30 years of service said very quietly that fighting back was not a realistic option at the current ratio of forces, and that perhaps the council should consider what integration actually meant before choosing it over everything else. Into the middle of that argument, a woman named Dr. Siobhan Reyes raised her hand. She was an astrophysicist. She had spent her career studying stellar magnetism and the gravitational behavior of the outer solar system. She did not have a rank or a uniform. She had a calm face and a question that cut through every voice in the room like a beam of focused light. "Has anyone actually looked at what they surrounded themselves with?" she asked. The room went quiet, she continued. The Keth'ari formed a perfect sphere around our heliosphere. Every ship holds a fixed position. That formation is precise, and it is impressive, and it is also, if you think about it carefully, a targeting solution. They arrange themselves around a star, our star, a star with 8 planets, over 200 moons, 4 million catalogued asteroids, a magnetosphere stretching beyond Jupiter that is the largest in this solar system, and an output of 3.8 times 10 to the power of 26 watts of energy per second. They did not surround us. They surrounded our weapon. They simply do not know that yet. I was already pulling up my sensor data before she finished speaking. The geometry she was describing, was something I had been staring at for an hour without seeing it. Once she said it out loud, I could not unsee it. 3,417 fixed positions, 3,417 targets. Every one of them locked in place by the very precision that made the formation look unbeatable. To maintain a perfect sphere, every ship had to stay exactly where it was. They could not scatter. They could not reposition without breaking the formation and opening a gap. They had built a cage, and then they had stepped inside it. What followed was 71 hours of the hardest, strangest, most desperate work I have ever witnessed. The plan that emerged from Dr. Reyes and a team of engineers, physicists, and military strategists working without sleep was something that had no name in any tactical manual. They called it Operation Heliodrome informally, because it involved using the heliosphere, the entire domain of our sun, as a distributed weapons platform. The concept was simple. The execution was the kind of thing that makes you question whether humans are ordinary creatures or something else entirely. On Mercury, the planet closest to our sun, a network of mass driver stations originally built for mining purposes was reprogrammed and physically reoriented in 38 hours by crews working in suits on a surface where the temperature reached 400 degrees Celsius in direct sunlight. The mass drivers would fire synchronized plasma cores into the sun's chromosphere at precisely calculated angles, triggering a directed solar flare, not a random eruption, but a focused pulse of solar energy, aimed along 14 specific vectors, matching 14 clusters of Keth'ari ship positions. On Io, the volcanic moon of Jupiter, a team led by an engineer named Tomás Herrera welded magnetic amplifier arrays directly onto the moon's crust, using the volcanic heat as a power source. These arrays would interact with Jupiter's enormous magnetosphere and send a radiation pulse outward along the formation's northern hemisphere positions. Tomás worked for 41 hours without more than 2 brief rests. I listened to his crew's communications sometimes, patched through from the relay network. He swore in Spanish almost continuously. It was, oddly, one of the most comforting sounds I heard during those 71 hours. In the outer solar system, a network of drone relays began nudging comets. Not one comet, or 10, or 100, thousands of them, drawn from the Oort cloud, the vast shell of frozen objects that surrounds our solar system, far beyond the planets. Each comet was small, each nudge was tiny, but the trajectories were calculated so that arrival times would be coordinated, a drumroll of impacts across the outer positions of the Keth'ari formation, spread over the hours following the main strike. And Saturn, ringed, beautiful, ancient Saturn, would be the last piece. Engineers sent commands to automated stations scattered through the ring system, designed originally for long-term study. The stations fired lateral thrusters in sequence, beginning a controlled destabilization of the rings. What would emerge was not a shower but a cascade, a billion-kilometer wave of ice crystals and rock fragments, traveling outward along the formation's equatorial band, striking dozens of ship positions with the quiet, patient violence of a planet that had been waiting to be asked. I want to be honest about something, because I believe honesty about difficult things matters more than comfortable stories. There was a meeting, not in the main council chamber, but in a smaller room, with only a few people present, where Dr. Reyes laid out what all of this would cost. A directed solar flare of the required magnitude would flood the inner solar system with radiation. Earth's surface would require full shelter protocols for an estimated 3 years. One full agricultural season would fail, requiring reserves and synthetic food production on a scale never attempted. The changes to Saturn's rings would be permanent on any human timescale. The rings that humans had looked up at and painted and written about and sent probes to study would simply be gone. Europa's thin ice crust, which covered a liquid ocean beneath, might crack under the gravitational stress of the operation. Some of the Oort comets, once launched, could not be recalled. If the Keth'ari formation scattered in ways that were not perfectly predicted, some of those objects would travel into interstellar space and never return. The people in that room sat with those facts for a few minutes. Then every single one of them voted yes. I was not in that room, but I was told about it afterward. I have thought about those few minutes of silence many times since. There is something in them that I find difficult to name, but that I think is the truest picture of what human beings are when they are at their most serious. With 12 hours remaining in the Keth'ari countdown, a Keth'ari analyst detected the mass driver repositioning on Mercury. The hive mind processed it quickly, they were not slow thinkers, and cross-referenced the Jovian magnetic fluctuations, the comet trajectory data, the ring station activity. I watched the analysis happen in real time through their communication frequencies, which our signals team had partially cracked. The collective realization moved through their fleet like a wave. For the first time in the 71 hours since their arrival, the Keth'ari formation shifted slightly. Not enough to break the sphere, not enough to escape, but enough to tell me they understood. Their admiral transmitted directly to my relay station. I was the closest human point of communication, and they had known my location precisely from the beginning. Commander of Jupiter L4, the transmission said, you are preparing to use your stellar body as a weapon. This action is not consistent with rational survival behavior. No species in our recorded contact history has attempted the deliberate weaponization of their own star. We request that you confirm this analysis is incorrect. I sat with that message for about 30 seconds. Then I typed a reply, 6 words. I transmitted it on every open frequency I had, because I thought it deserved an audience. Welcome to the Sol system, I wrote. Then I opened the command interface and began the firing sequence. What happened next lasted 11 seconds. 11 seconds is not a long time. It is the time it takes to read 2 sentences aloud. It is shorter than the time it takes to boil a cup of water, but in those 11 seconds, a solar flare the size of a small planet unfolded along 14 vectors. Jupiter's magnetosphere pulsed outward in a ring of invisible force. The first waves of the Saturn cascade began their journey outward, and the leading edge of the Oort swarm arrived at the outer positions of the formation, with the quiet, inevitable patience of physics. For 11 seconds, 3,417 warships held position. Then they did not. I watched the contacts disappear from my scope, not all at once. In waves, following the geometry of the strike, the solar side positions first, then the Jovian hemisphere, then the equatorial band, then the outer shell as the comet wave rolled through. I sat in my chair, and I counted, and I kept counting, until the number I was looking for arrived. 0. The heliosphere was clear. I opened a channel to Earth, the first clean, unjammed channel in 72 hours. The signal took 43 minutes to travel from Jupiter L4 to Earth at the speed of light. I sat in the silence of my station and waited for the acknowledgement. Outside my small windows, the universe looked exactly as it always had. Jupiter hung in the dark, enormous and unhurried, its cloud bands moving in their slow ancient patterns. The sun was a bright point much farther away than usual, slightly elevated in radiation output, but already settling. Saturn, I knew, was different now. The rings were gone. I felt something about that, though I could not quite decide what. When Earth acknowledged, the voice on the other end was very quiet. The recovery was long and difficult in the way that all honest recoveries are. 3 years of surface sheltering. A generation of children who grew up largely underground and came out blinking and sharp-eyed and deeply curious about the stars they had heard so much about. Europa cracked along 2 fault lines, but did not open. The ice held. Saturn's debris disk would take 10,000 years to settle into something new. Scientists were already arguing about what it would look like. Months after the event, a distress beacon was located in the outer system, a single Keth'ari escape pod, drifting at low power in the debris field where the outer formation had been. The pod contained 1 occupant, the Admiral. They had survived, which I found I was glad about, though I could not entirely explain why. I went to meet the pod personally, in a shuttle that took 3 weeks to reach it. The conversation I had with the Keth'ari Admiral, through translation software, lasted 3 days. We talked about many things, about their civilization and ours, about how they had chosen their targets, about what they had expected to find, about what they had found instead. On the final day, the Admiral said something I have kept with me ever since. We have made contact with 61 species, they said. We have never encountered one that fights with its own sun. In our records, a stellar body is always classified as environment, never as participant. Everything in our solar system is a participant, I told them. We just had to point Sol in the right direction. I returned to Jupiter L4 after that and wrote my after-action report. It took 4 days. I wrote it carefully, because I knew it would travel far. Every civilization within 100 light-years would detect what had happened here, and send signals asking for explanation. I wanted the explanation to be accurate. The last paragraph I wrote as a wideband beacon, transmitted in 23 known languages, addressed to no one in particular, and to everyone. The Sol system is inhabited. The species calls itself human. They are curious, creative, and very strongly attached to survival. If you approach in peace, they will meet you warmly. If you approach to conquer, please understand. You will not be surrounding them. You will be stepping inside the weapon. The star is not the backdrop. The star is the point. I signed it with my name, my rank, the date, and the confirmed number of Keth'ari contacts removed from the heliosphere. I felt the number was important context. Some things need to be said clearly. That's your full 2,400-word story. One continuous piece, no headings, written in clean and simple English from Yael Doran's first-person voice. Every beat from the outline is woven in. The ring closing, Dr. Reyes's revelation, Tomas on Io, the cost accepted in silence, the 11 seconds, the aftermath, and the final beacon that closes the whole thing. Let me know if you'd like any section expanded, tightened, or adjusted in tone.